He lost his father in flames. Then the world told him his dog was gone too. 1 year later, a tired boy walked past a shelter and heard a bark that froze his heart. It was just one sound, but it shattered the silence he'd carried for 12 long months. No one believed the dog had survived. No one knew what he'd endured, stolen by criminals, beaten, starved, discarded like nothing. But something stronger than memory still lived in him, something called home. What happened next will bring you to tears, and maybe give you hope again. Before we begin, do you have a dog that changed your life? Drop their name in the comments. They might just remind you of someone in this story. The summer air in Trenton, Oregon carried the scent of pine and smoldering heat. The small riverside city sat quietly under a sky stained with the dull orange of an early July evening. Cicadas hummed in the tall grass behind old houses with peeling paint, and beyond the town square, families were beginning to gather for the Independence Day parade. But on the outer edge of town, far from the laughter and lawn chairs, a different kind of noise tore through the silence, a sound that would stay with Lucas Palmer for the rest of his life. The screech of tires, the hollow metallic echo of an impact, and then fire. Lucas, just 10 years old then, had been seated in the back of his father's police cruiser, swinging his legs and humming the theme from one of his cartoons. His father, Sergeant Jack Palmer, had been leaning over the hood of the car, talking to a man with slicked-back hair and mirrored sunglasses. Jack stood tall, broad-shouldered, with sandy brown hair cut short, and a firm but kind expression that made him look both like a protector and a teacher. He had served Trenton for over 15 years, loved by his precinct and the community. That day, he was investigating reports of illegal weapons trade. What neither he nor his son realized was that they were being watched. Beside the cruiser, a German shepherd sat alert in the passenger seat. Ashes. The dog was a 5-year-old canine officer, well-trained, muscular but lean, with sharp amber eyes and a dark saddle of fur that gleamed in the sun. He had been Jack's partner for over 3 years. To Lucas, he wasn't just a dog, he was family. The explosion came from underneath the vehicle. Later, investigators would find traces of a crude homemade device planted near the gas line. But at that moment, all Lucas knew was heat, a thunderclap that shook the world, and flames curling up around his window. He screamed his father's name as the world turned white and red. By some miracle, a bystander pulled Lucas from the wreckage before the flames devoured the car completely. He had second-degree burns on his arms, cuts along his temple, and a wound on his knee that would later scar. But he survived. His father didn't. The days that followed blurred into hospital lights, whispered condolences, and the constant smell of disinfectant. Lucas asked over and over, "Where's Ashes?" But no one had seen the dog. Some said he died in the fire. Others weren't sure. There were no remains, no collar, no proof of anything. Claire Palmer, Lucas's mother, aged 10 years in one. Tall, slender, with waves of ash-blonde hair usually tied back, Claire once carried the kind of gentle strength found in nurses and teachers. But after losing her husband, her eyes dimmed with a quiet weight. She tried to hide it, tried to be cheerful, to keep meals warm and school lunches packed. But grief lived in her posture, in the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. She never cried in front of Lucas, not once. At night, when Lucas had gone to bed, she'd sit at the kitchen table staring at her phone, rereading old voicemails from Jack. One of them was from that same morning. "Don't forget the picnic blanket today, love you." That voicemail never got deleted. One afternoon, a month after the fire, a teenage boy named Mason, who scavenged for scrap metal, came across something at the scene. A scorched but intact collar with a metal tag etched, "K9 Unit, Ashes, Members 0712. He pocketed it, unaware of its meaning, and sold it along with brass fittings and copper wires. It changed hands quietly, landing in a collector's box somewhere in northern Idaho. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in a damp underground facility camouflaged as a warehouse, Ashes had not died. He had survived the blast with a fractured back leg and burns across his right flank. Bystanders hadn't found him. Criminals had. The same organization Jack had been investigating took Ashes. They recognized his breed, his training, and his strength. But they didn't treat him like the hero he was. They caged him, beat him when he resisted, and fed him only enough to keep him alive. His collar was stripped, his name erased. He was nothing more than a tool. Over the months, they tried to force him into underground dogfights, but Ashes refused to attack the weak or wounded, so they used him as a guard dog for their contraband. The electric collar they gave him shocked him into submission. But something in Ashes never gave in fully. Something inside him still waited, still remembered a boy's scent, the voice of his partner, the comfort of being loved. The year passed slowly. Back in Trenton, Lucas kept asking. The drawings he once made of cartoons and superheroes changed. Now his notebooks were full of dogs, always the same one. German Shepherd, dark saddle, amber eyes. Claire didn't stop him. She let him draw, let him whisper stories to the wind at night, and she never once told him to stop believing. Eventually, Claire made a choice. 1 year after the fire, she packed their things. She said it was time for a new beginning. They left Trenton behind, heading west to a small town called Riverbend. Somewhere quiet, with hills, with trees, with fewer memories. Lucas sat in the back seat of their used Toyota, holding a small box of Jack's things. In it was a folded American flag, a watch with a cracked face, and a photo of Jack, Claire, Lucas, and Ashes standing under a giant oak. It was the only picture Lucas had where all 4 of them were together. The sun set behind them as they crossed the Trenton city line. Behind them, the place where it had all ended. Ahead, a town where something still waited, though none of them knew it yet. And on a highway 3 counties over, a battered dog with a limp dragged himself from a ditch where he had been dumped like garbage. No food, no water, covered in scars. But his heart still beat. His name had been forgotten by the world, but not by him. The rain in Riverbend came softly that morning, misting the treetops and painting the narrow roads with a gray sheen. The town was quiet, wrapped in a sleepy hush that only small places seemed to hold. Claire Palmer stood on the porch of their newly rented home, a weathered cabin tucked just shy of the forest line. She hugged her cardigan tighter around her slender frame as she watched Lucas tromp through damp leaves toward the road, his small backpack slung loosely over one shoulder. Claire was a woman in her late 30s, tall and willowy with pale skin that looked paler under Oregon's constant overcast sky. Her light blonde hair, once vibrant and full of bounce, now hung straight and often tied into a low bun. Grief had thinned her face and quieted her energy, but even so, her eyes stayed alert, watching Lucas for signs of something deeper, something still unspoken. After Jack's death, Claire had lost more than a husband. She had lost the rhythm of her home, the warmth of daily laughter. Moving to Riverbend hadn't erased the pain, but it helped dull the edges. She had recently started working at the town's library, part-time shelving, part-time reading hours for children. It kept her near Lucas and gave her hands something to do. Lucas hadn't said much since they arrived. He started school a week ago, but came home with silent shoulders and drawings instead of stories. Most of them were of dogs, one in particular, always with deep amber eyes and dark fur stretching down its back. At 10 years old, Lucas was thin and wiry with sandy brown hair that curled awkwardly at the ends and freckles that dusted his nose. His eyes were the same shade of hazel as his father's, but they didn't light up the same way anymore. When school ended each day, Lucas would head into the woods behind their house to sit at what he called Post Alpha, a makeshift fort of branches and bark he'd built in a hollow between two old trees. There he kept a notebook filled with drawings and a small flashlight. He told Claire it was for waiting. She didn't ask for what. On the other side of town, in the cold breath of early morning, Ashes limped along a narrow road flanked by trash bins and fog. His once glossy coat was now tangled and crusted with mud. Scars lined his rib cage and legs, and a fresh gash along his rear right paw left bloody footprints behind him. His ribs protruded slightly under damp fur, and his tail dragged low, twitching only when he heard tires in the distance. The rain didn't bother him. Pain had become something muted, distant, like thunder on the horizon. Driven by instinct and hunger, he pushed his nose into a green metal bin set beside a broken fence. His stomach ached with emptiness, and the sharp scent of rotting meat made his jaw twitch. He pawed at a plastic bag, tearing it open and biting into what used to be a sandwich crust. He didn't hear the footsteps behind him. Linda Crowley was out for her usual morning walk. A retired high school art teacher, Linda was in her mid-60s with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tidy braid and a no-nonsense expression that hid a deeply compassionate heart. She carried a bright yellow umbrella and wore rain boots decorated with little dogs. When she spotted the injured shepherd by the trash, she stopped cold. At first she thought he was a coyote until she saw the eyes. "Oh, honey," she whispered, lowering her umbrella. Ashes froze. He bared his teeth but didn't growl. His legs trembled. When Linda took a cautious step back and reached for her phone, Ashes didn't move. His ears flicked at her voice as she called the shelter. 15 minutes later, a van from the Riverbend Animal Rescue Center pulled up. Inside sat Sarah Dawson, notebook and her lap gloves in hand. Sarah was 31, tall and lanky, with long limbs that moved with careful precision. Her hair was a muted brown tied into a practical knot, and she wore dark-rimmed glasses that often slid down her nose. There was something distant in her demeanor, polite but reserved, like someone who'd learned to carry grief in silence. Years ago, Sarah had lost her younger brother to a drunk driving accident, and the quiet trauma of it had never truly left her. She found meaning in tending to broken things, especially animals. She knelt down slowly, speaking in a calm, measured tone. "It's okay, boy. We're not here to hurt you." Ashes didn't move until the scent of rubber gloves and antiseptic reached him. He let out a low whine, half warning, half surrender, then dropped his head as if expecting punishment. When they gently slipped a leash around his neck, he didn't resist. His body sagged, too weak to run, too tired to care. Sarah studied his frame and noted the scarring. Another fighter, she murmured to herself, but something about him felt different. At the shelter, Ashes was registered as intake number 107. No microchip, no collar, just bones under fur and eyes that followed everything. Sarah sat by his cage later that evening, watching as he ignored the food bowl but stared directly at her each time she spoke. Most dogs looked away. This one didn't. "Who are you?" she whispered. When she stood and walked away, he let out a breathy sound, not quite a bark, not quite a whimper. Just acknowledgement. She stopped in her tracks. Her hand tightened around the notebook. Sarah had seen hundreds of cases, but this one unsettled her in a way she couldn't name. Back at the Palmer house, Lucas sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket sketchbook in hand. He was drawing again Ashes at full strength, running through a field. In the background, a small wooden outpost labeled Post Alpha. Claire brought him a mug of warm milk. "You okay, sweetheart?" Lucas nodded. "He's still out there," he said quietly. Claire's throat tightened, but she just brushed his hair back. "Then I hope he finds his way home." Neither of them noticed the wind change or the sound of sirens passing down the highway, the ones that made a dog named number 107 lift his ears in a steel cage, his heart thudding once against his ribs like a memory too deep to name. The morning light filtered through the skylights of Riverbend Animal Rescue Center, falling in long stripes across the concrete floor. Inside kennel number 6, a German Shepherd lay curled against the wall, his breathing shallow and uneven. His fur was still matted dull with weeks of neglect, and there was a crusted wound on his back leg that the staff hadn't been able to clean fully. When the heater clicked on with a low mechanical hiss, he flinched, hard claws scraping against the metal kennel floor. He didn't bark. He never barked unless someone got too close. Sarah Dawson stood a few feet from the kennel, crouched low. Her hands folded patiently over her knees. Her glasses fogged slightly from the warmth inside the shelter after walking in from the cold. She was used to broken animals, but this one number 107 was different. There was something searching in his eyes, something that looked through people rather than at them. She'd been working here for nearly 8 years now. Tall and lean with tired shoulders and knotted brown hair, always tied back in a rubber band. Sarah was known around town as the quiet one at the shelter. But behind her reserved presence was a depth formed from pain her brother Thomas had died in a hit-and-run when she was in college. She'd been the one to find him. Since then, she found healing not in people, but in silence and in dogs like number 107. "You're not just a stray, are you?" she murmured, voice soft but clear. The German Shepherd's ears twitched, but he didn't move otherwise. Sarah set a bowl of fresh water inside the kennel without stepping in. She didn't dare try to touch him yet, but then she paused as if a thought suddenly landed. "Rusty," she said aloud, testing the sound. "You look like a Rusty." His coat, beneath all the filth, was mostly black with rust-colored edges, a saddleback shepherd with strong bone structure. Young, maybe 5 or 6, with a face too expressive to be feral. He blinked slowly but didn't react. "Rusty it is," she said quietly. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Lucas Palmer walked beside his mother as they made their way toward the market. It was Saturday, and the town square was scattered with booths, baskets of apples, homemade soaps, and signs advertising fresh honey. Claire had agreed to let Lucas come along, sensing his restlessness. His fingers clutched a folded grocery list, but his eyes weren't on the stalls. They were on the narrow brick building across the street with faded green lettering, Riverbend Animal Rescue Center. "Lucas," Claire said gently, "I'll just be 5 minutes. Can you wait out here?" Lucas nodded, but as soon as she turned, he drifted across the road. He'd seen the building before, walked past it, looked at it too long. But today he heard something. A bark. Not loud, not angry, just sharp and familiar. It came again, something twisted in his chest. Inside, Sarah was still kneeling beside Kennel 6 when the bark came. She glanced up, surprised. Rusty had stood unsteady and was staring toward the hallway. His posture had changed, not fearful, but alert, as if something long forgotten had just reached out and touched him. Lucas stepped through the front doors and into the lobby. A volunteer behind the desk gave him a polite smile. "Hi there. Are you here with someone?" Lucas ignored the voice. His feet were already moving. Down the hallway, toward the sound, toward the steel kennels lined on the right. Sarah turned when she heard footsteps. She opened her mouth to speak, but stopped when she saw the boy. Thin, freckled, brown curls damp from mist. His eyes locked on the shepherd behind the bars, and his breath caught in his throat. The dog stood still now, unmoving, staring back. Lucas stepped closer, just 3 feet away from the kennel. He reached out a hand, not to touch, but simply to be seen. "Ashes," he whispered. No response. Then he tried again, this time softer, the way he used to call him from across the backyard. "Ashes. Come here, boy." The shepherd's ears perked sharply. He let out a low, uncertain whine and tilted his head. Lucas stared. "It can't be." Sarah slowly walked over. "Do you know this dog?" Lucas didn't answer. He just nodded, eyes wide and wet. "That's my dog. His name's Ashes." Sarah hesitated. "Sweetheart, this one came in without tags, without a chip. He was in really rough shape." "Are you sure?" Lucas stepped forward. "I'm sure. He has a scar on his back leg shaped like a hook. He got it chasing a raccoon in the park." His voice cracked on the last word. Sarah blinked. That scar had been noted in the intake report. Most assumed it came from a fight. But a raccoon. Ash's Rusty let out another sound. He padded forward slowly, body tense but eyes focused only on the boy. When he reached the bars, he stopped, then gently pressed his nose against the metal. Lucas didn't move. Neither did Sarah. At the front, Claire stepped in, calling Lucas, and stopped dead when she saw the boy frozen in front of Kennel 6. Lucas didn't turn. He whispered again, this time just one word. "Home." The light inside Kennel 6 was dim by late afternoon, casting long shadows along the shelter floor. Rain tapped softly against the windows of Riverbend Animal Rescue Center, a quiet percussion that seemed to muffle every sound except for the rhythmic thud of a tail against metal. Lucas stood still, one hand lightly brushing the side of the kennel, his fingers trembling. His heart beat in his ears as he stepped back and took a slow breath. Sarah watched from behind her arms, folded across her chest, trying to steady her thoughts. Rusty? No, possibly. Ashes hadn't growled, hadn't retreated, but something unmistakable had shifted in his eyes when the boy called his name. Now Sarah leaned closer still outside the kennel door. "Lucas," she said carefully. "Can you do that again? That whistle you mentioned." Lucas nodded, hesitating for just a moment before puckering his lips and letting out a sharp two-tone whistle, the one his father used to call Ashes from across their backyard or field. It was a clean sound, high, then low, and it echoed faintly against the tile walls. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the German shepherd shuddered visibly, his legs stiffening. A low rumble vibrated in his throat, not hostile but confused, uncertain. Did he do that before Sarah asked, eyebrows knitting? Lucas nodded. Always. He'd stop whatever he was doing and come back to Dad. Every time. Rusty or Ashes gave another short growl, then backed into the corner ears, twitching. His tail, however, thumped softly against the ground twice. Sarah turned away for a moment, breathing through her thoughts. Then she walked briskly to the storage room and returned with a handheld scanner. "Let me check something." She stepped toward the kennel and knelt down, holding the device just outside the bars. "Easy, boy," she murmured. The German shepherd didn't move until she slipped her hand inside, slowly waving the scanner along his left shoulder. A dull beep sounded. Sarah leaned forward. "Found a chip," she said, tone tightening. But she squinted at the screen. "That's strange." Claire, now standing nearby, her expression tight with concern, stepped forward. "What is it?" Sarah looked up. "The chip's data is corrupted, like someone scratched it or tried to erase it. It's registering, but the number's incomplete. Someone wanted this dog untraceable." Lucas's eyes widened. "Why would anyone do that?" Sarah didn't answer right away. Instead, she rose and gently reached into the side compartment of the kennel's storage unit, pulling out a cloth pouch where they'd placed the dog's soiled collar and remnants of the fabric strip he had when he arrived. "We found this tucked into his collar lining," she said, handing a small folded scrap of damp paper to Claire. The ink had smudged, but faintly, almost ghost-like, a set of numbers and letters remained: K9, Unit 27, SGT J. Palmer. Claire froze, hand trembling. She slowly handed it to her son, who stared at the writing as though the world had cracked open in front of him. "It's real," he whispered. "It's him." Sarah looked between them. "Lucas, do you remember what Ashes used to do when you got home from school?" Lucas's lips curled slightly. He waited at the window. Then when I opened the door, he'd wag and bring me my sock from the laundry basket like it was treasure. Sarah smiled faintly. Let's test something. She brought an old worn-out sock from the donation box, plain, white, slightly musty. Standing near the door of Kennel 6, she held it in her hand, then rolled it toward the dog. The moment it stopped at his paws, he looked down, sniffed once, then carefully lifted it in his jaws and sat back on his haunches, eyes trained on Lucas. The room fell silent. Then, without warning, a loud snarl tore through the air from the adjacent kennel. A muscular pit bull, recently brought in and still adjusting, had lunged at the bars, baring teeth at Lucas, who had stepped slightly too close. Before anyone could react, Ashes dropped the sock, sprang to his feet, and let out a thunderous bark, deep, commanding, protective. He positioned his body between Lucas and the other dog, tail high, shoulders squared. Sarah quickly moved between the two kennels, calming the pit bull named Duke. Claire pulled Lucas back, heart pounding. "He just protected you," she whispered. He remembered. Sarah's hands were shaking as she checked Ashes again for injuries. That was a trained response. This isn't just instinct. He wasn't just someone's pet. Claire nodded. He was trained by Jack, my husband. Ashes served alongside him for over 3 years, and we thought he died in the explosion. Sarah knelt beside the dog, her voice low. He didn't die. He was taken from that fire. Someone tried to erase him. Lucas reached forward, placing his hand flat against the bars. But he remembers. Ashes inched forward, lowering his head and touching his nose to the metal panel between them. Sarah slowly stood. We'll need to follow this up. But Lucas, I believe you. This dog isn't just some stray. He's Ashes. Claire wiped a tear from her eye. What happens now? We document everything, Sarah replied. We notify animal services. We start cross-checking old canine records. But first, she looked at Lucas. I think Ashes just remembered his boy. 2 days had passed since Ashes responded to the whistle. The shelter was quieter than usual, as if everyone was holding their breath. Sarah had started documenting every interaction between Lucas and the German Shepherd. She had written detailed behavioral notes and taken photos of the scar, the chipped tooth, and the unusual reflexes that hinted at past training. The staff no longer referred to the dog as Rusty. Though the paperwork hadn't been updated officially among the volunteers, he was now simply Ashes. That morning, Sarah arrived earlier than usual. Her knit beanie barely hid her messy braid, and the dark circles under her eyes betrayed another night of little sleep. She walked through the corridors of kennels with a thermos in hand, nodding at the sleepy-eyed intern Maria, who had just started her shift. Maria, 19 short, with a bob haircut dyed teal, was chatty but observant. She pointed toward the front desk. There's a guy asking about the German Shepherd. Says he's the owner. Real pushy. Sarah's pulse quickened. She moved toward the front and found a man leaning over the counter, speaking in a slow, calculated tone. Declan Rhodes was in his late 30s, with a stocky frame, sharp jawline, and buzzed dark hair. His denim jacket looked clean but worn, and his boots were scuffed and caked with dried mud. He had a calm presence, but there was something unsettling behind his pale blue eyes, like a man constantly calculating outcomes. I heard you picked up my dog, he said as Sarah approached. German Shepherd. Male, scar on the hind leg. Sarah's stance stiffened. Do you have proof of ownership? Declan reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. It was a veterinary certificate with the name Max listed and an address that appeared out of town. Sarah scanned it. Everything looked legitimate, too legitimate. She motioned toward the hallway. Wait here, please. Then under her breath to Maria, stall him if you have to. Back in Kennel 6. Ashes was dozing when Lucas arrived with Claire. Lucas held a tablet in his hands and his face glowed with excitement. I found something, he said, holding it up. It's a video Dad took of him and Ashes training at the field by the station. Claire peered at the screen. The video was shaky but clear. It showed Jack Palmer, tall and firm, giving hand signals to Ashes. The dog stayed retrieved a glove, then circled around a set of cones on command. At the end, Jack knelt and scratched behind his ears. "Good boy, Ashes," his voice said, deep and affectionate. "That's my boy." Lucas handed the tablet to Sarah. "Do you think—" She smiled. "Let's see." She crouched by Ashes's kennel and held the screen close. As soon as the dog heard Jack's voice, he snapped awake. His ears perked, eyes locked on the device. Then, when the command to sit came from the video, Ashes sat immediately. When Jack said around, Ashes stood and moved in a small circle before settling again. Lucas beamed. "See, it's him. He remembers everything." Before Sarah could reply, Maria called from the front. "Sarah?" "He's insisting." Claire stepped forward. "Should I take Lucas outside?" But Sarah shook her head. "No. Stay. He might need you." They walked back to the front just as Declan entered the hallway. When he saw Ashes, he smiled tightly. "There he is. Been looking for you, boy." Ashes rose, his body stiffened. Hackles up. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Declan reached out a hand. "Come here, Max." Ashes lunged not to attack, but to bark ears, flat teeth bared. It was not fear. It was fury. Sarah stepped in quickly, placing a hand on the kennel door. "He doesn't seem to recognize you." Declan smirked. "Maybe he's just confused. He's been through a lot." Lucas stepped up beside Sarah. "He knows who you are, and he hates you. You did something to him. And to my dad." Declan's eyes darkened. "Kid, I don't know what you've been told, but that's my dog." Claire moved protectively beside Lucas. "What's your dog's command cue for stay for down? What food does he hate? What was his first toy?" Declan hesitated. "He likes beef jerky. He fetches balls. And he was a guard dog, not a family pet." Sarah's lips pressed into a line. "That's funny, because he responds to police hand signals, not civilian ones, and we found this inside his collar." She held up the photo of the paper scrap with Jack Palmer's name. Declan's face barely flinched. "Must be a mistake." "I already contacted someone," Sarah said. "Sheriff Miller. He worked with Jack Palmer. He's on his way." Declan's jaw tightened. "I'll be back with a lawyer." Sarah nodded. "Good, because that's exactly what you'll need." He turned sharply and stormed out, slamming the front door behind him. Silence followed, broken only by Ashes's steady breathing. Lucas whispered, "He remembers who hurt him." The sky over Riverbend had cleared that morning, the rain retreating into memory, leaving dew-speckled rooftops and a shimmering brightness over the trees. In the parking lot outside the shelter, a county sheriff's vehicle pulled up with quiet authority. Sheriff William Miller stepped out, his boots crunching against gravel. Tall and square-shouldered, with graying hair at the temples and deep-set eyes beneath a brow carved by decades of experience, Miller carried the air of someone who'd seen much and forgotten nothing. He wore a brown leather coat over his badge and a dark green shirt, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the building before walking through the doors. Inside, Sarah stood ready, clipboard in hand. Her usual calm looked thinner today. "Sheriff," she said, offering a nod. Ms. Dawson Miller returned the gesture. "Where's the dog?" Sarah motioned toward the back. "Kennel 6. He nodded once. "Let's get to it." Lucas and Claire had arrived earlier at Sarah's invitation. Now they waited in the side hallway, Lucas nervously bouncing his knee while holding the old video of his father on the tablet. He had dressed more neatly than usual, a navy hoodie and clean jeans, and kept glancing toward the main lobby as if bracing for someone else to walk through the doors. Ashes sat quietly in his kennel. Since the confrontation with Declan, the dog had changed. Not in aggression, he was calmer, more focused, but he had taken to sitting by the kennel's window slit every evening as if watching for danger that only he could see. When Miller appeared, Ash's ears perked. The sheriff approached slowly. He didn't speak right away, only observed. Then, without prompting, he extended his hand in a loose fist. "Let's see what you remember, partner." Ash's tilted his head. Then slowly he moved forward and sat. It wasn't obedience. It was instinct. Familiarity. Miller's face tightened just slightly. "Well, I'll be damned." In a private exam room, the shelter's visiting vet, Dr. Elise Tran, was already setting up for the scan. Dr. Tran, a Vietnamese-American woman in her early 40s with a calm, methodical presence, wore a fleece jacket over her scrubs. She had almond eyes that missed nothing, and a kind voice she saved for animals and children. "We'll take 2 samples," she said. "One from fur, one from saliva." Lucas stood quietly as the swab was taken, hands clenched into fists. "Can I stay?" he asked. Sarah looked at Miller, who gave a small nod. "He's earned it." After the samples were sent off to the state lab for priority processing, thanks to Miller's request, everyone waited. 24 hours later, the results came in. Sarah opened the file in her office, Lucas seated beside her, Claire watching from the corner. The document was clear. DNA match 99.8%. Subject K9 Ashes. Handler Sergeant Jack Palmer. Status presumed deceased revised. Lucas exhaled shakily. Sarah turned toward him with a small, trembling smile. "It's him, Lucas. Officially." Claire pressed a hand over her heart. Jack would have wanted this moment. Later that day, Miller returned to the shelter with something in a small cloth pouch. He called Lucas aside. "This was recovered from your father's personal effects after the fire. It was too damaged to return to the department. I thought maybe you'd want it." He opened the pouch. Inside was a scorched but intact K9 unit badge, slightly warped by heat, but with the initials JP still visible. Lucas held it like it might break in his hands. Ashes sat a few feet away. Lucas turned lowered to one knee and showed the badge. Ashes didn't react right away. But then he moved forward slowly and gently pressed his nose against the badge, then into Lucas's palm. He rested there, head bowed. Sarah turned away and wiped her eyes, caught off guard by the sudden surge of emotion. She wasn't someone who cried easily anymore, but this cracked through the wall. Ashes nestled his head into Lucas's lap. It was the first time since the shelter took him in that he initiated contact without prompting. That night, Ashes sat by the window of the Palmer cabin, head resting on his paws, watching the stillness outside. Lucas lay on the couch nearby, blanket over his knees, the badge resting on the coffee table like a silent witness. Claire stepped into the room with a mug of cocoa. She stood quietly, just watching them. Sarah had dropped them off with a quiet farewell, but not before whispering, "He remembers not just where he came from, but why he came back." Outside the night was calm, and inside Ashes kept his watch not as a broken dog, but as a protector once more. The crisp air of early October drifted through the open windows of the Palmer home, carrying in the scent of pine and damp leaves. Riverbend had begun its slow turn toward autumn trees, shedding gold skies, deepening in hue, and the town itself growing quieter under the hush of shorter days. For the first time in a long time, Claire, Lucas, and Ashes were settling into something that felt real. Ashes still had scars, some visible, others buried deep, but there was peace in the way he moved now, no longer trembling at every creak of the house or ducking his head at the clang of pots. Lucas had been patient with him, never forcing affection, always giving space. He learned to keep his voice soft, his footsteps deliberate. And slowly, day by day, Ashes began to trust the silence again. One evening, as the sky turned rose-colored above the treetops, Lucas sat with Ashes on the front porch, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, the badge of his father nestled in his palm. He looked down at the dog lying beside him, muzzle resting on his feet. "I don't have to be brave when you're here," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Ashes lifted his head and gave a soft whine, then nudged his nose against Lucas's leg. Claire watched from the kitchen window. Her blonde hair was now a little longer, curled gently at the ends, and she had started wearing colors again, shades of green, soft burgundy. Her smile returned in fragments, usually when she saw her son laugh or Ashes chase leaves in the yard. After weeks of uncertainty, she'd found something of her own, too. She had begun hosting morning yoga classes at the town hall for a small group of local women, most of them widows or recently divorced or quietly lonely. Claire's voice during those sessions was calm and grounding, and her gentle instructions gave the others space to breathe. It was her own kind of healing. Lucas, encouraged by Sarah's suggestion and with help from a boy in his class named Caleb Waters, had launched a blog titled Ash's Way Home. Caleb was a bright-eyed 11-year-old with thick glasses and boundless curiosity. He lived with his single mom, a nurse who often worked late and spent most afternoons reading or building things from spare parts he scavenged. He was shorter than Lucas, a bit awkward but loyal. The two had clicked over a shared love of animals and storytelling. They wrote the blog together from the computer at the Riverbend Library. Lucas dictated entries. Caleb edited the grammar. Their first post told the story of Ash's disappearance and reunion, weaving in pictures Sarah had taken. Within a week, the post was shared dozens of times in local community groups. Comments began to flood in. I cried reading this. "We adopted a dog yesterday because of this story. Please keep writing." One message came from a family 2 towns over, parents of 3 children who had planned to surrender their older Labrador Max to the shelter that same week. After reading Ash's Way Home, they changed their minds. Max might be slow, but he's been with us through everything the father wrote. Thanks to your blog, we remembered what matters. Lucas printed the email and taped it above his desk. Ashes continued to improve. He still flinched at red flashing lights. Lucas learned not to play his toy police car near him, but the dog no longer hid during thunderstorms. He had claimed a spot beside the fireplace where he curled into a tight ball each evening. His coat began to regain its shine, and the slight limp from his rear leg faded with daily walks and rest. Sarah visited often, usually bringing treats or chew toys. She'd stay long enough to chat, drink tea, and check on Ash's progress. Her bond with the dog remained gentle and respectful. She never pushed, always let him come to her. One Sunday morning, Ashes walked up to her unprompted and pressed his head into her side. She knelt down, whispering, "You're safe now, aren't you?" And he let out a soft sigh, as if answering yes. As Riverbend leaned into the chill of mid-autumn, Lucas prepared a special entry for the blog, titled, "The Things That Made Him Stay." It listed small moments from each day that showed Ashes was healing. He didn't run from the vacuum. He barked at the squirrels but wagged his tail. He brought me my sock again just like he used to. It ended with a line that read, "I think Ashes is coming home more every day. Not to the house, but to his heart." Claire read it and quietly wiped her eyes. One Friday afternoon, Lucas was invited to speak about the blog at his school's assembly. He stood on the stage nervous but proud with Ashes beside him, wearing a blue support vest Sarah had given them. The audience of students and teachers fell silent as Lucas spoke into the microphone. "This is Ashes. He used to belong to my dad, Officer Jack Palmer. After my dad died, Ashes was taken from me. He went through things I can't imagine. But he came back, and now he's not just my dog, he's my friend. We help each other get better." When the applause came, Ashes barked once, loudly startling everyone. Then he sat down, tail wagging. Lucas laughed for the first time in a long while, unforced and real. The river behind the Palmer home moved slowly beneath a sky brushed with the last hues of evening. The light was soft gold, tipped in rose, as if the world itself had chosen to whisper rather than speak. It had been exactly 1 year since the fire that changed everything. A year since Jack Palmer had gone and since Ashes had vanished. And now, full circle, they stood in the quiet of this moment, healed, scarred, and still standing. Claire had laid out a small picnic blanket on the grassy riverbank. She wore a simple navy sweater, hair loose around her shoulders, and in her hands was a folded sheet of stationery cream paper with faint lavender lines. Her handwriting was careful, steady, but the ink smudged slightly in one corner where a tear had fallen. Lucas sat cross-legged beside her, a thermos of cocoa in front of him, and the canine badge resting in his palm. He was taller now, or maybe just stronger. A quiet confidence replacing the shadow that used to cloud his gaze. His arm rested lightly on the back of the dog stretched beside him. Ashes, tenser once now calm, lay with his head on Lucas's leg, his body relaxed in a way only a dog that knows he's home can be. The breeze ruffled his ears, and he blinked slowly, eyes half closed but alert to the rhythms of the water and wind. Across from them, Sarah stood silently at a respectful distance, hands folded in front of her. She wore her usual practical coat and boots, but today her eyes were bright. She wasn't here as the shelter manager or as a handler, but simply as a witness to something rare. A few other townspeople had quietly gathered among them. Caleb and his mother, a slim woman with dark curly hair, tied back in a bun, wearing nurse scrubs under a hoodie. Behind them stood Linda Crowley, the woman who had found Ashes in the trash bundled in her plaid jacket and holding a thermos. They hadn't planned a crowd, but word had spread. Riverbend knew what day it was. Lucas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded card. He opened it, cleared his throat, and read aloud, not to the group, but to the river. "Dear Dad, I thought you left me alone, but you didn't. You left me Ashes, and he brought me back, not just home, but back to myself. Thank you for training him to protect me, even when you couldn't anymore." He looked down at Ashes, whose eyes fluttered open, and smiled. Claire stepped forward, then, kneeling down and placing her letter gently on a smooth river stone. "Jack," she whispered. "Ashes brought us home. You can rest easy." She didn't cry. Not because she didn't feel it, but because something in her had finally been released. Sarah approached quietly and laid a small framed photo beside the letter. It was one she'd taken Lucas and Ashes curled together in the shelter, both asleep, the badge resting between them. Behind them, the quiet was broken by a rustle. A small production crew, 2 camera operators and a soft-spoken journalist named Meredith Wynn, stood respectfully at the edge of the trees. Meredith was in her early 40s with a calm energy and kind gray eyes. She had come to Riverbend after reading the Ashes' Way Home blog, and what was meant to be a short feature turned into a full story on second chances and the loyalty of dogs. The camera rolled quietly as Lucas placed the badge beside the rock, then leaned back on his hands. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. Ashes, still resting, lifted his head. The sun was just touching the treetops now, setting the sky ablaze with deep orange and pink. And then, without warning, Ashes raised his nose into the wind and let out a single, long, low howl. It wasn't loud. It wasn't pained. It was ancient, soft, and echoing as though calling out to something beyond the trees. A memory. A promise. A farewell. The small crowd stood still, breath held. Then Ashes settled back down, placing his head once more on Lucas's knee. The hush remained for several moments more. In the days that followed, the news piece aired. From Fire to Family. The story of Ashes played across Oregon television screens, then rippled out onto national platforms. Claire was invited to speak on a podcast about grief and animal companionship. Lucas's blog saw a wave of new readers, and in 1 week, Ash's Way Home helped match 5 abandoned German shepherds with new families. One email read, "We were going to give up on our rescue dog. He's anxious and jumpy and scared of thunder. But then we read Lucas's story, and now we're going to try again. Thank you." Back in Riverbend, life didn't change drastically. But the small things deepened. Neighbors brought dog biscuits to the Palmers' mailbox. The school librarian created a section called Tales of Loyalty and placed a copy of Lucas's story in it. Even the town's diner offered a free biscuit to anyone who adopted a dog that month. As for Ash's, his nights were still spent by the window, but his posture was no longer that of a sentinel on watch. Now it was peaceful, soft, like a dog who finally knew the war was over. On some evenings, Claire would sit beside him and open the letter again, just to read it, just to remember. And Lucas, he grew not just in age, but in spirit. He understood now that healing didn't erase scars, it honored them. And Ash's, with every wag of his tail, every step by Lucas's side, was proof that even those left behind could find their way back, especially when someone was waiting. Sometimes the ones we love don't leave us, they just come back in ways we never expect. Ash's didn't return by accident. He came back because love remembers, because loyalty doesn't die in flames. And perhaps it was never just fate that brought him home. Maybe it was grace. Maybe it was a quiet miracle from above sent to remind us that even when the world feels lost, God still watches, still guides, still heals. This story is not just about a boy and his dog. It's about second chances. It's about the unseen threads that connect hearts even across pain, distance, and time. It's about how sometimes God doesn't answer our prayers the way we expect He answers them better. So if you're going through a season of waiting or loss or doubt, remember miracles rarely shout. Sometimes they just wag their tail and find their way home. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment: the name of a pet who changed your life. If you believe in second chances and loyalty, and in the quiet ways God still works, hit that subscribe button. And if you're praying for a miracle, comment Amen, so we can all pray together. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, and lead every lost soul safely home.